The moment I saw Brenda Hutchins marching up my driveway at 6 a.m. with a clipboard and that telltale HOA swagger, I knew my peaceful retirement was about to explode. What I didn't expect was her pulling out her phone and dialing 911 right there on my porch, screaming about federal crimes and terrorist threats. "Yes. I need the FBI immediately," she shrieked into the phone while her discount store blazer flapped in the morning breeze. "There's a dangerous man here threatening the entire community with illegal weapons and government surveillance equipment." I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, watching this woman completely lose her mind on my property. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, because what Brenda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined in her wildest power trip fantasies, was that she'd just called my former colleagues, the very people I'd led for 15 years as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The ranch was supposed to be my escape from decades of hunting serial killers, stopping terrorist plots, and navigating political minefields in Washington. After retiring at 58, all I wanted was 50 acres of Montana wilderness, where the biggest threat would be a grumpy bear or a broken fence post. I'd bought the property sight unseen, drawn to its isolation, and the promise that the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that those 5 miles included the edge of Pine Valley Estates, a gated community that had recently expanded its HOA jurisdiction through some creative interpretation of county zoning laws. For 6 months, I'd lived in blissful ignorance, fixing up the old ranch house, learning to ride again, and slowly forgetting what it felt like to carry the weight of national security on my shoulders. Then Brenda discovered my existence. The first sign of trouble came in a certified letter that I had to sign for at the post office. "Notice of non-compliance with community standards," it read in bold letters across the top. According to Miss Hutchins, president of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association, my ranch was in violation of 17 different regulations, including but not limited to fence height, acceptable livestock species, and something called visual harmony standards. I actually laughed when I read it, thinking it was some kind of prank. Who tries to enforce HOA rules on a working ranch that predates their entire development by 50 years? But the letter's threatening tone made it clear this was no joke. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in legal action and potential property forfeiture. Property forfeiture. This woman thought she could take my ranch because she didn't like the color of my barn. A week later, Brenda made her first personal appearance. I was out checking the fence line when I spotted a pearl-white Lexus creeping up my access road, music blaring what sounded like motivational podcasts about manifesting your authority. She parked right in front of my gate, blocking the entire entrance, and emerged wearing what can only be described as her interpretation of business casual, complete with a rhinestone-encrusted name tag that said, "President Brenda, HOA Enforcement Division." The woman was maybe 5'2" in her platform heels, but she carried herself like she was 6 feet tall and bulletproof. "Mr. Stone," she called out, waving her clipboard like a battle flag, "I need to conduct an immediate property inspection for compliance verification." I walked over slowly, taking my time, which seemed to agitate her even more. "Ma'am, this is private property. You're welcome to turn that car around and head back the way you came." Her face went through several shades of red before settling on something between crimson and purple. "I have absolute authority to inspect any property within our expanded jurisdiction zone. Subsection 47B of our community charter clearly states," but I cut her off with a raised hand. "Your community charter has about as much authority on my land as a grocery list. This ranch isn't part of your HOA. Never has been, never will be." That's when she pulled out her phone and started recording, narrating like she was producing evidence for court. Subject is being hostile and refusing lawful inspection. Note the aggressive body language and intimidating demeanor. The visits became a weekly occurrence, each one more absurd than the last. She'd show up with different violation notices, ranging from my horses being the wrong shade of brown, to claims that my 100-year-old oak tree was architecturally inconsistent with community aesthetics. One morning she brought a tape measure and tried to document that my mailbox was 2 inches too tall. Another time she arrived with a color wheel, insisting my barn needed to be repainted in approved earth tones from their official palette. I started keeping a log of her visits, partly for legal protection but mostly because no one would believe the stories without documentation. The woman was like a caricature of every HOA horror story rolled into one, but with an extra dose of delusional authority that made her genuinely concerning. Things escalated when she discovered I had security cameras around the property. She showed up one afternoon with two men she introduced as her compliance officers. Though they looked more like unemployed gym buddies she'd hired off Craigslist. "Those cameras are a violation of community privacy standards," she declared while ironically filming me with her phone. "You're conducting illegal surveillance of residents?" I pointed out that my cameras were aimed at my own property and the public road, but logic wasn't part of Brenda's vocabulary. She demanded I remove them immediately or face criminal charges for voyeuristic activities. That's when I made my first mistake. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh at the absurdity of it all. Her face twisted into something that belonged in a horror movie. "You think this is funny? You think you can just mock the HOA? I'll show you what happens to people who don't respect proper authority." The next phase of her campaign involved what I can only describe as psychological warfare. She started sending violation notices daily, each one more creative than the last. My gravel driveway was generating excessive dust pollution. My rooster was creating unauthorized wake-up calls. My American flag was displayed with improper illumination. She even claimed my horses were loitering with intent when they stood near the fence line. But the masterpiece came when she sent a notice stating that my unauthorized breathing was contributing to excessive carbon dioxide levels in the community airshed. I kept that one framed in my office as a reminder that no matter how crazy things got in my FBI career, at least I never had to deal with someone trying to regulate my respiratory functions. The situation took a darker turn when I started finding evidence of trespassing, footprints in my garden that didn't match my boots, gates left open that I knew I'd secured, feed bins tampered with. One morning I found a bright orange condemned notice stapled to my barn door, complete with an official-looking seal that upon closer inspection was clearly printed on a home inkjet printer. Security footage revealed Brenda sneaking onto my property at 3 a.m. with her compliance officers, placing fake violation stickers on everything from my tractor to my chicken coop. When I confronted her with the evidence, she claimed she was conducting emergency safety inspections that didn't require permission. That's when I knew this had moved beyond simple harassment into criminal territory. I tried the diplomatic approach first, sending a formal cease and desist letter through my attorney. The response was a 50-page document that can only be described as the manifesto of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. In it, Brenda claimed she had sovereign authority over all land within a 10-mile radius of Pine Valley estates, granted to her by a combination of natural law, community consensus, and something she called the divine right of property management. She accused me of being part of a conspiracy to undermine legitimate governance and threatened to have me charged with sedition. Yes, sedition. Against a homeowners association. My attorney called it the most unhinged legal document he'd seen in 30 years of practice, and this was a man who'd defended actual sovereign citizens. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when I woke to find my entire front pasture had been marked with bright pink survey stakes. According to the notice taped to my door, Brenda had annexed 40 acres of my land for community improvement projects, including a dog park and meditation garden. She'd even brought in a bulldozer that was idling at my gate, ready to start clearing trees. That's when I made the call I'd been avoiding. Reaching out to my former deputy director at the FBI, "Tom, you're not going to believe this, but I might need some unofficial advice about a civilian who's lost her damn mind." The laughter on the other end was worth the embarrassment of admitting I was being terrorized by a suburban Napoleon in bedazzled jean jackets. But Brenda wasn't done with her master plan. That evening, she organized what she called a community intervention at my front gate. About 30 residents from Pine Valley Estates showed up, most looking confused and uncomfortable as Brenda lectured them about the clear and present danger I posed to their property values and personal safety. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation, complete with photos of my property doctored to make it look like a junkyard. My well-maintained ranch had been photoshopped to include rusty cars, garbage piles, and what appeared to be a missile silo where my tool shed stood. The crowd grew increasingly skeptical as her claims became more outlandish, especially when she insisted that my chickens were trained attack birds and my elderly border collie was a weaponized canine asset. The community meeting devolved into chaos when one brave soul asked to see actual evidence of HOA jurisdiction over my property. Brenda's response was to scream, "I am the evidence, I am the law, I am the HOA," while stamping her feet like a toddler having a meltdown in a grocery store. Several residents started backing away slowly, clearly realizing their president might need professional help. One elderly gentleman asked if she'd been feeling all right lately, which triggered a 5-minute rant about how questioning her authority was tantamount to treason. By the time she finished, most of the crowd had dispersed, leaving just Brenda and her 2 increasingly uncomfortable compliance officers standing at my gate in the fading light. That night, I installed additional security cameras and motion sensors, having a feeling things were about to escalate dramatically. My instincts proved correct when at 2 a.m., alerts started going off on my phone. The cameras captured Brenda and her crew attempting to cut through my fence with bolt cutters. When that failed, they tried to ram the gate with her Lexus, which resulted in nothing but a crumpled bumper and deployed airbags. The footage of her screaming at the gate to submit to HOA authority while her car alarm blared was simultaneously hilarious and deeply concerning. But what happened next removed any trace of humor from the situation. She pulled out her phone and made the call that would change everything. "I need to report a domestic terrorist. He's got weapons, government equipment. He's threatening to kill everyone in Pine Valley Estates." Within an hour, the ranch was surrounded by law enforcement vehicles, first the local sheriff, then state police, and finally 3 black SUVs that I recognized all too well. FBI tactical response teams don't deploy lightly, and someone had convinced them there was a credible threat at my location. I stepped out onto the porch with my hands visible, knowing the protocol from the other side. What I wasn't prepared for was seeing Jake Morrison, an agent I'd personally recruited 15 years ago, stepping out of the lead vehicle. The look on his face when he recognized me was priceless, a combination of shock, confusion, and barely suppressed laughter. "Director Stone? Sir, what the hell is going on here?" But before I could answer, Brenda came charging forward, waving her clipboard and screaming about her authority being challenged. "Arrest him. He's a terrorist. He's building weapons. He's spying on everyone." She grabbed Jake's arm, trying to physically drag him toward me. "I have documented evidence of his crimes against the Homeowners Association." Jake gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm and looked at me with raised eyebrows. I shrugged and gestured toward the house. "Come on in, Jake. I'll make coffee and explain how I've apparently become public enemy number 1 to the Pine Valley Estates HOA." As we walked toward the house, Brenda's shrieks reached a pitch that probably violated several noise ordinances. "You can't just ignore me. I called you here. I'm the president. I have authority." Jake paused and turned back to her. "Ma'am, making false reports to federal law enforcement is a felony. I suggest you stop talking before you dig yourself any deeper." Inside, I showed Jake and his team the collection of violation notices, the security footage, and the increasingly unhinged correspondence from Brenda. What started as professional skepticism quickly turned to disbelief and then outright amusement as they reviewed her claims that I was running a paramilitary training facility disguised as a horse ranch. When they got to the part about my chickens being trained attack birds, one of the younger agents had to excuse himself because he was laughing too hard. Jake shook his head in amazement. "Sir, in all my years with the Bureau, this might be the most insane false report I've ever seen. This woman actually believes you're a threat to national security because your mailbox is 2 inches too tall?" The real entertainment began when Jake decided to interview Brenda formally. She demanded to give her statement, convinced it would result in my immediate arrest and property seizure. What followed was 45 minutes of the most bizarre interrogation footage the FBI had probably ever recorded. Brenda presented her evidence with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many legal dramas and understood none of them. Her smoking gun was a photo of me carrying a rifle, which she claimed proved I was planning an assault on Pine Valley Estates. Jake patiently explained that carrying a hunting rifle on your own ranch in Montana was not only legal but practically required. She then pivoted to claims that my security cameras were actually government surveillance equipment being used to spy on residents. When Jake pointed out that I was retired, she insisted it was all a cover story and that I was probably still active in deep state operations. The interview reached peak absurdity when Brenda accused me of using psychological warfare tactics by refusing to acknowledge her authority. She pulled out a binder labeled Evidence of Mental Manipulation that contained photos of me smiling and waving when she drove by. According to her, this was a classic intimidation technique designed to undermine legitimate governance. Jake's struggle to maintain professional composure was visible as she explained how my friendly demeanor was actually a form of aggressive non-compliance. When he asked if she had any actual evidence of criminal activity, she pointed to a photo of my vegetable garden and claimed the arrangement of tomato plants was a coded message to anti-government militias. After the interview, Jake found me on the back porch enjoying the sunset and trying to process the surreal turn my retirement had taken. "So, Director, want to explain how you ended up on the wrong side of the most delusional HOA president in America?" I gave him the full story, from the first violation notice to the attempted midnight fence cutting. Jake laughed until tears ran down his face, especially at the part about unauthorized breathing contributing to excessive carbon dioxide levels. Only you could retire to the middle of nowhere and still end up dealing with crazy people. Though I have to say, after some of the cases we worked together, this might actually be weirder. We spent the next hour catching up, sharing stories about former colleagues and how different life was outside the bureau. As the FBI team prepared to leave, they had one more surprise for Brenda. Not only were they not arresting me, but she was being charged with multiple federal crimes, including making false reports, misuse of emergency services, and harassment of a federal official. The look on her face when Jake read her rights was something I'll treasure forever, a perfect mixture of disbelief, indignation, and dawning horror as reality finally penetrated her OA bubble. "But I'm the president," she kept repeating as they led her to the car. "I have authority, he's in violation. This isn't how it's supposed to work." Her compliance officers had disappeared the moment the FBI badges came out, apparently deciding their loyalty to Brenda didn't extend to federal charges. The next morning brought reporters. Apparently someone had leaked that the former FBI director had been swatted by a suburban HOA president. Headlines ranged from HOA, Karen calls FBI on former FBI boss, to When Karens Attack, the federal edition. My favorite was, Local woman discovers the hard way that her target ran the FBI. The stories were picked up nationally, turning Brenda into the poster child for HOA overreach and generally unhinged behavior. Pine Valley Estates found itself in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons, with property values taking a hit as potential buyers wondered what kind of community would elect someone like Brenda as their president. The current residents were mortified, especially when investigators revealed the extent of her harassment campaigns against other neighbors. The legal fallout was swift and thorough. Beyond the federal charges, Brenda faced multiple state charges for trespassing, harassment, and vandalism. The fake documents she'd created, including the forged annexation papers and counterfeit violation notices, added fraud charges to her growing list of legal problems. The county also launched an investigation into Pine Valley Estates' claimed expansion of jurisdiction, finding that Brenda had essentially made it up and that the HOA had no authority beyond their actual gates. Several residents came forward with their own horror stories of Brenda's reign of terror, including an elderly veteran she'd tried to fine for displaying an American flag, and a young family she'd harassed for their children's chalk drawings. My testimony at her trial was perhaps the most satisfying 3 hours of my retirement. I presented the evidence methodically, just as I'd done hundreds of times before in federal cases. The violation notices, the security footage, the deranged correspondence, it all painted a picture of someone who'd let a tiny amount of power corrupt her completely. When Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she was just doing her job as HOA president, I pointed out that her job definitely didn't include attempted breaking and entering, filing false federal reports, or claiming divine right to annex private property. The judge seemed particularly interested in the unauthorized breathing violation, actually asking Brenda to explain her reasoning. Her response that she was trying to maintain atmospheric standards didn't help her case. Brenda was ultimately convicted on all counts, receiving 2 years in federal prison and 3 years of probation, during which she was banned from serving in any HOA or similar organization. The judge also ordered her to pay restitution for the emergency response costs and undergo psychological evaluation. As they led her away, she was still insisting that she had authority and that this was all a conspiracy to undermine legitimate community governance. The Pine Valley Estates HOA was dissolved shortly after, with residents voting overwhelmingly to abandon the organization rather than risk another Brenda. Property values actually went up once word spread that the neighborhood was now HOA-free, proving that sometimes the best amenity is the absence of petty tyranny. The aftermath brought unexpected benefits to my quiet retirement. Several neighbors from Pine Valley Estates started stopping by, initially to apologize for Brenda's behavior but eventually just to chat and share a beer. The elderly veteran she'd harassed turned out to be a Korean War survivor with incredible stories. The young family brought their kids by to see the horses, and soon I was giving riding lessons on weekends. The community that Brenda had tried to control through fear and intimidation instead came together through mutual respect and shared relief at her absence. Even her former compliance officers showed up one day to apologize, explaining that they'd been unemployed and desperate when she'd hired them to play enforcement. I hired them to help with some ranch work, figuring everyone deserved a second chance. Jake and several other former colleagues started making regular visits, turning my ranch into an unofficial FBI retirement hangout. We'd sit around the fire pit, sharing war stories and laughing about how my biggest case in retirement involved a suburban dictator with a clipboard. The security cameras I'd installed to catch Brenda became a running joke, with Jake suggesting I could start a reality show called HOA Hunters, Retirement Edition. The footage of Brenda trying to ram my gate became legendary within the bureau, shown at training academies as an example of how not to approach a federal investigation. Someone even made a compilation video set to yakety sax that circulated through law enforcement channels. Looking back, the whole experience taught me that retirement doesn't mean the crazy people stop finding you, they just come in different forms. Instead of international criminals and terrorist cells, I got Brenda Hutchins and her color-coordinated violation notices. Instead of complex investigations spanning years, I got a woman who thought she could annex my land with pink survey stakes and a home-printed seal. But in a strange way, it was the perfect transition from my bureau career. It reminded me that justice isn't just about the big cases. Sometimes it's about standing up to petty tyrants who try to make their neighbors' lives miserable. And sometimes the best investigation is the one that ends with the bad guy arresting themselves through sheer stupidity. The ranch is peaceful now. Properly peaceful without the weekly visits from Brenda and her clipboard. The horses graze without worrying about being the wrong color. The chickens cluck without fear of being classified as attack birds. My mailbox stands proudly at its illegal height, a monument to the defeat of arbitrary authority. I've even put up a small plaque by the gate that reads, "This property protected by the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and common sense." Visitors always ask about it, giving me the opportunity to tell the story of how a retired FBI director became public enemy number one to a homeowners association and lived to laugh about it. The local sheriff stops by occasionally for coffee, and to joke about the night his quiet county became ground zero for an FBI tactical response. He's framed the incident report and hung it in his office under a sign that says, "Sometimes they really are crazy." The story has become local legend, told in bars and diners across the county as a cautionary tale about the dangers of giving the wrong person a little bit of power. New residents moving to the area are warned about the ghost of HOA past and assured that those days are over. Pine Valley Estates even changed their welcome sign to read "A community of neighbors, not rulers," as a permanent reminder of what they'd learned. I still have all the violation notices, carefully preserved in a filing cabinet labeled "The Brenda Files." They serve as a reminder that no matter how far you run or how quietly you try to live, there's always someone out there who thinks they have the right to tell you how to breathe. But they also remind me that justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a federal indictment. Sometimes it's a community coming together to reject tyranny. And sometimes it's just a man on his ranch refusing to bow to a woman with a clipboard and delusions of grandeur. The FBI taught me how to catch criminals, but Brenda taught me that sometimes the best strategy is to let them catch themselves while you sit back and enjoy the show. These days, when people ask about my retirement, I tell them it's been more exciting than I expected. They usually assume I mean traveling or taking up new hobbies, not defending my ranch from a would-be dictator in rhinestone accessories. But that's the beauty of life after the bureau. You never know what form the next case will take. It might be an international conspiracy, or it might be a suburban HOA president who thinks she can regulate your respiratory functions. Either way, the skills translate: patience, documentation, and the knowledge that eventually, crazy always reveals itself. And when it does, you'd better have the cameras rolling, because nobody's going to believe the story otherwise. The ranch has become something of a pilgrimage site for people dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I get letters from across the country sharing similar stories and asking for advice. My response is always the same: document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the power of simply saying no to someone who has no actual authority over you. The Brenda incident has become a teachable moment about the importance of understanding property law and the limits of organizational power. Law schools have even used the case as an example of what happens when perceived authority meets actual legal jurisdiction. One professor told me it's the perfect illustration of how confidence and a clipboard don't equal legal standing. As for Brenda, I heard she's writing a book in prison about her experience. Something about being a victim of government oppression and the deep state conspiracy to silence community leaders. Her publisher dropped her when they realized the manuscript was 800 pages of rambling about her divine right to regulate mailbox heights. She still sends letters occasionally, demanding that I acknowledge her authority and warning me that she'll be back to enforce compliance when she's released. I forward them all to Jake, who started a collection he calls Dispatches from Crazy Town. He's threatened to publish them as a handbook for identifying delusional behavior in the field, though I think he's joking. Mostly, the whole experience has given me a new appreciation for the simple freedom of living, without someone trying to control every aspect of your property. I wake up each morning grateful that I can paint my barn any color I want, let my grass grow to whatever height feels right, and breathe as much as I damn well please without getting a violation notice. It's the little things you don't appreciate until someone tries to take them away, even if that someone is a 5'2" dictator in platform heels with a bedazzled clipboard. The American dream isn't just about owning property, it's about being free from the Brendas of the world who think their petty authority extends beyond their actual jurisdiction. Sometimes in the evening, when the sun is setting over the mountains and the ranch is bathed in golden light, I think about all the complex cases I worked during my FBI career. The serial killers, the terrorist plots, the corruption schemes that reached the highest levels of government. None of them prepared me for Brenda Hutchins and her homeowners association. But in a way, she was the perfect final case. A reminder that evil doesn't always come in the form of international conspiracies or violent criminals. Sometimes it comes in the form of a suburban busybody with too much time and a fundamental misunderstanding of how authority works. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't catching a most wanted fugitive, it's just keeping your mailbox at whatever height you please. The story has become a part of local folklore now, told and retold with various embellishments. Some versions have Brenda arriving with an army of HOA enforcers, others include helicopters and SWAT teams rappelling onto my roof. The truth is strange enough without embellishment, but I let people enjoy their versions. After all, everyone needs a good story about standing up to tyranny, even if that tyranny comes in the form of a woman who thought she could regulate the color of horses. The important thing is that people remember. Remember that you don't have to accept arbitrary authority. Remember that documentation beats intimidation. And remember that sometimes the best response to someone claiming divine right over your property is to simply laugh and let them call in the cavalry. My ranch stands as a testament to that principle now. 50 acres of freedom where mailboxes can be any height, horses can be any color, and breathing is still unregulated. The gate that Brenda tried to ram with her Lexus has been reinforced and bears a small plaque that reads, "Brenda's Folly," as a permanent reminder of the night she discovered that perceived authority and actual authority are very different things. Visitors always ask about it, and I'm always happy to tell the story, complete with security footage if they're interested. It's become something of a tradition, sitting on the porch with a cold beer, watching the sunset, and recounting the tale of how the former director of the FBI became the target of the most incompetent HOA president in American history. In the end, Brenda did me a favor. She reminded me why I spent all those years in law enforcement, not for the big cases or the headlines, but to protect ordinary people's right to live their lives without being harassed by petty tyrants. She reminded me that freedom isn't just a concept defended in courtrooms and battlefields. It's defended every day by ordinary people who refuse to bow to arbitrary authority, and she gave me the best retirement story anyone could ask for. A tale of suburban madness that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. So here's to Brenda Hutchins, The woman who called the FBI on their own former director and learned that sometimes the best qualification for dealing with crazy is 30 years of experience catching actual criminals. The ranch is truly peaceful now, the kind of peace that comes from winning a battle you never wanted to fight in the first place. The horses roam freely, blissfully unaware they were once accused of being the wrong shade of brown. The chickens peck at the ground, no longer suspected of being trained attack birds. And I sit on my porch each evening, breathing as much unauthorized air as I want, secure in the knowledge that my mailbox will forever stand 2 inches taller than Brenda Hutchins thought it should be. It's not much of a monument to victory, but it's mine, and that's all that matters in the end. Sometimes the smallest freedoms are the ones worth fighting for the most, especially when someone with a clipboard thinks they can take them away. The peace lasted exactly 3 months before Brenda's disciples decided to carry on her crusade. It started with mysterious flyers appearing around Pine Valley estates, poorly designed manifestos about restoring proper community governance and honoring President Brenda's vision. The grammar was atrocious and the logic non-existent, but the message was clear. Someone thought Brenda was a martyr rather than a cautionary tale. I might have ignored it if they hadn't made the mistake of posting one on my gate. The flyer proclaimed me enemy number 1 of community standards, and called for residents to peacefully monitor my property for violations. Apparently, Brenda had left behind a detailed manual on how to harass me, complete with schedules, talking points, and a scoring system for different types of violations they might fabricate. The new ringleader was Brenda's former book club friend, Dorothy Crenshaw, a woman who made Brenda look stable by comparison. Dorothy had apparently been taking notes during Brenda's reign and decided she was the chosen successor to the HOA throne. Despite the minor detail that the HOA no longer existed, she showed up at my gate one morning wearing what I can only describe as a homemade uniform, complete with military-style patches that said things like Community Enforcement and Deputy President. Her attempt at an authoritative presence was undermined by the fact that she'd spelled enforcement wrong on one of the patches, and her hat was clearly a modified pizza delivery cap. "Mr. Stone," she announced in a voice that cracked with nervous energy, "I'm here to inform you that the Provisional HOA Authority has been established to continue President Brenda's important work." I leaned against my gatepost and studied this new would-be dictator. Dorothy was probably 75, wearing orthopedic shoes that squeaked with every step and glasses so thick they could probably start fires in direct sunlight. Her clipboard was bedazzled within an inch of its life, and she'd attached what appeared to be a bicycle horn to her belt, presumably for emphasis during important announcements. "Dorothy," I said as gently as possible, "Brenda is in federal prison for harassing me. Are you sure this is the path you want to go down?" She honked the bicycle horn twice before responding. "President Brenda is a political prisoner, a victim of the deep state conspiracy to destroy community values. And you," she pointed a shaking finger at me, "you're the ringleader of it all." The situation became even more surreal when Dorothy revealed her master plan. She'd recruited what she called the HOA Resistance, a group of 6 elderly residents who met secretly in Dorothy's garage to plan their comeback. Their meetings, according to a neighbor who'd accidentally walked in on one, involved elaborate charts tracking my daily movements, blurry photos of my property taken with flip phones, and heated debates about whether my chickens were sending coded messages through their clucking patterns. They'd even created their own currency called HOA bucks that they planned to use once they regained power. The fact that the currency was clearly printed on Dorothy's home computer and featured a picture of Brenda wearing a crown didn't seem to bother them. They'd already tried to use it at local businesses, leading to several awkward encounters and at least one call to Adult Protective Services. Jake called me after the 3rd complaint reached the FBI office about the HOA Resistance conducting surveillance on federal property, meaning my ranch. "Director, I hate to tell you this, but you've got another situation brewing. Dorothy Crenshaw has been filing Freedom of Information requests, trying to get your FBI personnel file. She's convinced you're still active and running psychological operations against her HOA." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "Jake, I'm a retired man who just wants to raise horses and drink coffee in peace. How do I keep attracting these people?" Jake's chuckle came through the phone. "Sir, with all due respect, you're like catnip for crazy. Remember the Senate hearings where that conspiracy theorist accused you of running mind control experiments? This is just the suburban version." The HOA resistance escalated their tactics in ways that were more sad than threatening. They attempted to establish checkpoints on the public road near my ranch, which lasted exactly 15 minutes before the sheriff arrived, and explained that impersonating law enforcement was illegal. Even if your badge was made from a laminated library card, they tried to issue community currency citations to delivery drivers coming to my property, leading to very confused Amazon drivers and one FedEx employee who asked if he needed to contact the police. Dorothy even attempted to conduct a citizen's arrest on my mail carrier for aiding and abetting violations, which ended with the postal inspector having a very stern conversation with her about federal mail interference laws. The breaking point came when Dorothy organized what she called a Freedom Restoration rally in the vacant lot next to Pine Valley Estates. About 12 people showed up, mostly out of morbid curiosity, to watch Dorothy give a speech from a makeshift podium made of stacked milk crates. She wore a sash that said, "Acting President," and had created a flag for the provisional HOA that looked like it was designed by someone who'd never seen an actual flag before. The rally featured Dorothy reading from Brenda's manifestos, which turned out to be mostly complaints about me with increasingly creative spelling errors. The highlight was when she attempted to lead the crowd in a chant of "Bring back Brenda," but forgot the words halfway through and started chanting "Bring back breakfast" instead. The local news crew that showed up left after 5 minutes, deciding there wasn't enough coherent content for even a comedy segment. I decided to take a different approach with Dorothy than I had with Brenda. Instead of waiting for her to self-destruct, I invited her for coffee. She showed up in full regalia, including a new cape she'd added to her uniform and what appeared to be a plastic tiara. We sat on my porch while she explained her theories about how I'd orchestrated Brenda's downfall as part of a larger conspiracy to destroy American community values. I listened patiently, refilling her coffee cup and offering cookies, while she detailed how my chickens were probably surveillance drones and my horses were trained to intimidate neighbors. When she finally ran out of steam, I asked her a simple question. "Dorothy, what do you actually want?" The question seemed to break something in her. She deflated like a punctured balloon, the tiara sliding sideways as she slumped in her chair. I miss having something important to do," she admitted, her voice small and tired. "When Brenda was president, I was part of something. I was the recording secretary. I took minutes. I had a purpose. Now I just sit at home watching game shows and waiting for my kids to call, which they never do." The confession was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Here was a lonely woman who'd found meaning in Brenda's bizarre bureaucracy and couldn't let go, even when it led to federal prison. I spent the next hour talking with Dorothy about finding healthier ways to feel important. By the end, she'd agreed to dissolve the HOA resistance and consider volunteering at the local library instead. She left the cape and tiara on my porch, saying she didn't need them anymore. I kept them as a reminder that sometimes the villains in our stories are just lonely, people looking for purpose in all the wrong places. With Dorothy's surrender, the last vestiges of Brenda's regime finally crumbled. The remaining members of the HOA resistance quietly returned to their normal lives, presumably embarrassed by their brief stint as geriatric revolutionaries. One of them, a sweet old man named Harold, actually apologized and offered to help me repair some fence damage from Brenda's midnight raids. While we worked, he told me stories about Pine Valley Estates before Brenda took over, when the HOA was just a group that organized holiday decorations and summer barbecues. "She changed when she got that clipboard," Harold said, hammering in a fence post. "It was like watching someone get possessed by a demon, except the demon was obsessed with grass height and mailbox regulations." His insights into Brenda's transformation from neighbor to tyrant were both fascinating and disturbing. The ranch became something of a therapy center for recovering HOA victims. People would stop by to share their stories and find solidarity with others who'd suffered under petty community dictators. I started hosting monthly gatherings I called Freedom Fridays, where neighbors could come enjoy the ranch without worrying about violation notices or compliance checks. These events grew from a handful of people to massive potlucks with live music and horseback riding. The sheriff even stopped by occasionally, not for law enforcement but to judge the chili cook-off we'd started. It was everything a community gathering should be: organic, voluntary, and completely free of anyone with a clipboard trying to regulate the fun. Even some former HOA board members from other neighborhoods started attending, sharing their own stories of how power corrupted their organizations. Jake and my other FBI buddies turned the ranch into their unofficial reunion spot. Once a month, a convoy of retired agents would show up with coolers and war stories. We'd sit around the fire pit trading tales that couldn't be told while we were active. Jake brought the surveillance footage of Brenda's attempted gate ramming, and we'd watch it like a comedy special, complete with commentary and instant replay. "You see right there," Jake would say, pausing the video. "That's the exact moment she realized airbags are real and not just a suggestion." These gatherings became legendary in retirement circles, with former agents driving from 3 states away to attend. We even had shirts made that said, "I survived the HOA wars," with a picture of Brenda's mugshot on the back. One of the most satisfying developments was the legal precedent the case set. Law schools started teaching Stone v. Hutchins as a textbook example of jurisdictional overreach and the limits of organizational authority. I got invited to speak at several universities, sharing the story with future lawyers who couldn't believe it was real until I showed them the documentation. The unauthorized breathing violation became particularly famous, cited in multiple papers about the absurdity of unchecked authority. One professor even created a whole semester course called When Karens Attack, Property Law and HOA Governance that used my case as the primary study material. Students would email me their papers analyzing different aspects of Brenda's legal failures, and I'd grade them on accuracy and humor. The media attention brought unexpected opportunities. A documentary filmmaker wanted to create a feature-length film about the incident, complete with reenactments and interviews. I agreed on the condition that any profits would go to a legal fund for HOA abuse victims. The filming process was surreal. Watching actors recreate Brenda's meltdowns while the real security footage played on monitors nearby. The actor playing me was far too handsome and kept trying to add action sequences that never happened. There was no fist fight. I had to keep reminding the director. I just stood there drinking coffee while she imploded. The coffee mug was the real hero of this story. The documentary, titled The Clipboard Dictator, won several awards and raised enough money to help dozens of families fight their own HOA battles. Letters poured in from around the world. Apparently, HOA tyranny was a universal problem. A man in Australia dealt with a body corporate that tried to ban him from hanging his laundry outside. A woman in Canada fought a condo board that demanded she remove her doormat for being too welcoming. Each story reinforced how lucky I was that Brenda had been incompetent enough to call the FBI on their own former director. One letter particularly stood out, from a young family in Texas whose HOA had tried to foreclose on their home over unpaid fines for having the wrong shade of beige paint. They'd used my case as precedent to fight back and won, saving their home and getting the HOA president removed. Knowing that Brenda's spectacular failure had helped others stand up to similar tyrants made the whole ordeal worthwhile. On the anniversary of Brenda's arrest, Pine Valley Estates held their first annual Freedom from HOA Day celebration. The entire community gathered for what was essentially a roast of their former president. Residents took turns sharing their worst Brenda stories, from the woman she'd fined for having a bird bath that attracted unauthorized wildlife, to the man she'd tried to evict for flying a sports team flag during playoffs. The highlight was a piñata shaped remarkably like Brenda, complete with clipboard and platform heels. When it finally broke open, it rained down candy and miniature copies of the Bill of Rights, a reminder that actual freedom trumps made up authority every time. Even Dorothy attended, laughing at her own former delusions and wearing a shirt that said, "Reformed HOA Resistance." The story took another twist when Hollywood came calling. A major studio wanted to turn the incident into a comedy starring some A-list actors. The script they sent was so over the top I couldn't stop laughing. They'd added car chases, explosions, and a subplot where Brenda was secretly working for an international HOA conspiracy. I declined their offer but suggested they make it anyway as pure fiction. Nobody would believe it was based on real events anyway. Instead, I worked with a smaller production company on a limited series that stayed true to the absurdity of what actually happened. Watching talented actors bring the story to life was surreal, especially the actress playing Brenda who'd studied the footage so intensely she could recreate the gate ramming scene down to the exact pitch of the screams. As Brenda's release date approached, there was considerable speculation about whether she'd return to Pine Valley Estates. The community had changed dramatically in her absence, becoming a model for how neighbors could coexist without oppressive oversight. Property values had increased. New families had moved in attracted by the HOA free zone status, and the neighborhood had won several beautification awards through voluntary participation rather than forced compliance. A few residents worried she might try to reclaim her throne, but most felt confident that her time had passed. The local paper ran a retrospective on her reign, interviewing dozens of former victims who shared stories ranging from hilarious to horrifying. The general consensus was that Brenda had inadvertently done them a favor by showing them exactly what not to do with community governance.